again, everyone who watches these videos. In this segment of our interview series, Deyson and Rogan will be getting into the nitty-gritty details about how exactly they put together this EP and more of the technical stuff. And I'll be here asking questions about the technical stuff that are things that I might not understand, that you might not understand, but probably just I don't understand. And with that, I will let Rogan and Deyson take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you.
We have got Wings open here. So, and I think the easiest way to go through this might just be to go section by section, see all the instrumentation we have going on, and then we can look more in depth at how that was all mixed. And I know, Rogan, you can talk more about how a lot of this was recorded and what pieces of software or instruments you used for different parts.
Yeah.
So the session for Wings also had letters from a lost soul, the intro kind of orchestral piece in it. We'll hit play. So you get the idea. It's a nice sounding orchestra. Rogan, do you want to... I know you mentioned in the last video, you want to kind of run us through what software you used for those orchestral parts?
Yeah, so I think this was a little different because I wrote this more on a piece of software called Finale that is more towards a like an orchestral or a like professional composers like standard of writing softwares, where the rest of the EP was pretty much done through Guitar Pro because that works better with guitars. But in terms of the instruments that I used the Native Instruments Symphony Series string ensemble. And I believe what we have there is your 5-piece string orchestra, so 2 violins, viola, cello, and double bass. And then I believe the cello and maybe the double bass are doubled for a part. And yeah, an interesting thing that the Symphony Series does is if you have a doubled part in the same piece of software, it will split the amount of voices. So normally there's 30 voices in a single track, I believe. But if you split that part between multiple pieces, it will put 15 in one and 15 in another. So it will sound like you're splitting the orchestra up.
Nice.
It sounds like the kind of song that an audience would do this to.
And from a mix perspective, I didn't do any EQ on any of this. I just kind of brought the faders up and panned them in a way that would be balanced. Like I wanted there to be an equal amount of information on the left and the right side. So just volume and panning to kind of give you a balanced stereo image, and then a little bit of reverb on, let's see, the violins, and yeah, just the violins using Ascend to Soundtoy's little plate with like pretty generic settings, honestly. The time decay is kind of right in the middle, no modulation, just a little bit of a high pass filter on it because I usually don't like having too much reverb in like the bass frequencies. I find that gets muddy. So yeah, really simple mix for all of the orchestral stuff. So going on to kind of the next section of this song. Here I can see it where the bass comes in. So we've got like a clean bass part as well as some harmonics on the guitar and a synth in the background. So maybe we'll start by looking at the bass. So you said this was a Warwick Corvette, Rogan?
Yes.
So this is just the bass soloed. Now I apologize if this isn't 100% accurate to what mix actually got released. This Dark Glass Ultra plugin that I'm using, it was in its early days when I was working on this mix, and for some reason the cabinet settings that I used didn't get recalled when I brought this up again. But we'll cut Neural DSP some slack because they were a really new company at the time. Some of the early versions of their plugins had little glitches like that. But let me take all my processing off, and we'll just listen to what this bass sounded like as a DI. Kind of like a pretty normal sounding bass DI. First thing I did is put a limiter on it. That's kind of what gives it that quality of being really dynamically consistent. It almost gives it a synth-like quality because each note is relatively the same volume. And then where the real work was happening was with this Dark Glass Ultra plugin by Neural DSP, just running it through the preamp clean, kind of boosting the bass a lot and the high mids, pulling some of the low mids out. Treble is right at 12 o'clock. And then on the cabinet section, again, I don't remember exactly what settings I used. This is just the default stock settings, but it sounds pretty close to what the bass sound was. I might have just moved some of these mics around a little bit in here. So that's the bass.
Man, I really liked taking the first beat out of out of the second measure on this album.
It's a cool
I'm just
swing.
realizing.
Yeah, you
like
did that a lot.
in 3 different spots and in separate rhythms.
It's a distinct feel for sure. All right, so the synth. Only EQ I did on this was a high pass. And yeah, what instrument was this?
I believe it was just Massive. Yeah,
Massive
Native
again?
Instruments. Yeah.
And I think I can see. So for EQ wise, I just did a high pass to take out any rumbly low end, because that stuff doesn't really serve a whole lot of purpose in a synth pad. And then just the same send to Soundtoy's little plate, just to give a bit of reverb, as well as a delay, a quarter note delay. Doesn't look like there's too much crazy stuff happening in this plugin either. Just kind of your generic quarter-inch delay to give it a little bit of space and a little bit more sustain. And then lastly in this section we have these 2 clean guitars. So I'll have to see what's happening on the bus. Rogan, do you remember what guitar and like what pickup position you would have used for these guys?
Not pickup position, but I believe this entire song was recorded on my Ibanez 7421.
Okay.
Yeah, the RGD 7421.
Right.
I was probably I tend more towards the like the neck or the mid, just to get a little bit more of that treble sound.
Right.
For stuff like that.
Now I'm trying to remember. I think I might have reamped these through my Mesa Boogie Mark V combo amp at the time. I think the clean guitars were all reamped through that. So that's let me turn all my stuff off. I
think we did some of the distortion as well.
I think I ended up replacing most of the distortion with other things because I wasn't quite happy with how it turned out. Just like it's a 1x12 open back cab. It doesn't quite sound big enough, I find, for like things that you want to sound really heavy, but it did cleans really well. So there's the sound right off the amp. EQ wise, you can see I did a high pass and I got rid of, I notched out a couple of annoying frequencies. So, I mean, the easiest way to show what I did is if I boost this back up. I wanted to get rid of, there's like a, kind of some ringing frequencies.
Overtone in there.
Yeah. This one was the worst. Just to clean it up a little bit. And then I have a bunch of sends here. So it looks like it went to a same little plate send for some reverb, a 1/4-inch delay, probably the same send as the synth was going to, a half note delay, and an 1/8 note delay. So I think what I used to do, and I probably still do this now, is I'll set up a bunch of different delays and I'll send instruments to like the 3 delays at the 3 different notes in different blends to kind of give it the rhythmic feel I want. So it's definitely mostly the eighth note delay that I hear on that. But I guess the 1/4 note and the half note just kind of give it more sustain. It kind of, the notes ring out a little bit longer because you have those longer delays in there as well. So that is, I think, all of the stuff going on in that very first intro part. What's the next instrument that comes in?
I think drums have that roll, that snare roll.
Yeah, everything comes in here, it looks like.
Yeah.
Right. So we kind of have everything here. So this might be a good time to look at the drums. Let's go to my drum mix and see what's going on. So that's what the drums sound like on their own. What I'm remembering now is, I think in the first mix I sent you, it was all natural drums. I hadn't used samples or anything like that. But it just sounded a bit too dark, and I had really leaned on the room mic slot, so it was kind of dark and roomy sounding, which wasn't really the vibe we were going for on these songs. I think we were going for a more bright, kind of dry, like very clear, articulate drum sound. And back in these days, I didn't really feel comfortable blending in natural drums and samples. So I think at that point, when I realized the natural drums weren't giving us what we wanted, I just turned down all the close mics on my drums and replaced them with samples. Which it didn't sound bad. It's not, I don't think I would ever do that now, but it worked. It works for these songs. I at least picked the right samples, I think.
You guys discuss music much the same way that a sommelier might discuss wine. Notes of dry brightness in this one. Oh, this one's a little muddied.
These drums sounded too oaky.
Yes. Can I interject with a bit of the musical aspects of this sort of the starting riff that comes in here?
Sure.
So yeah, we can through that like little split sample that Deyson just played with just the drums. We like kick off this entire album with with that my polyrhythmic obsession, where like we're starting with that like 4/3, but it's in a 7 like a 7/4 measure, so we just add sort of a beat right on the end, and so it's extended, so like the first 6 beats of that are like a 4/3 polyrhythm, and then you have that one extra beat on the very end, and then it goes back to that same function. And then the guitars more or less follow that. I think they are on a they're on a dotted quarter or a dotted eighth or something, following the 4 on that, with the eighth note at the end of that, like 7/8 or 7/4 measure.
So how did you decide what time signatures to use for it?
So it's all kind of what, going back to what we said in the interview, like I have that melodic idea in my head, and that ended up being that harmonic section, and that ended up being in 7/4, and I very much wanted it to feel kind of that like janky sort of cut off, like you got that one extra beat in there before going to the next measure, and then the bass underneath it with that like with that rhythm that doesn't put any note, like any accent at all, on the beat 1 of the next measure. That kind of filled that in and makes it feel cohesive, I guess would be the word. So yeah, very much it's from that starting idea of that one little melodic section, and then I build it from there.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Sweet. Why don't we take a look? I'm curious as to which samples I used and how those got processed. Here's Steven Slate drums 4. So snare 15 is apparently what snare I used, which is very descriptive. Kick was kick 10. Yeah, all these Slate samples they're mostly named. This one's Tom Birch, so I used whatever the Birch toms were. Shouldn't be anything on the cymbals. Yeah, I didn't use the cymbals at all. Just the close mics on the drums. So let's check out this kick. It's a nice sounding kick. It's like nice and deep. EQ wise, kind of just cleaning up, taking out some of these mid-range frequencies that can be kind of muddy sounding on kick drums. And then it looks like there was a couple abrasive little frequencies in the high end that just made it sound too clicky without the EQ. Yeah, I feel like it just took up too much space before that EQ. And then I'm doing some work with this API modeled EQ from Waves, basically adding a bunch of click with this 5K and a bit more kind of that thumpy sub frequency at 50 hertz with the low band. If I take this off,
Oh yeah.
it's just kind of flat sounding without it.
Yeah.
Not punchy enough for a dense mix like this. Let's see the snare. So it looks like, yeah, I've noticed Steven Slate drums, the output is always really low, so I just put a plug in here to gain it up, I guess. EQ wise.
Sorry,
what were you gonna say?
Jason, I just have a question. So, in a lot of industries, an API is something that calls to another piece of software, or like an intermediary piece of software. And I was wondering, is that the same in what you're talking about here, or does API mean something else?
No, API is a famous American audio company that used to make recording. Well, I think they still make recording consoles. But there's kind of like a few big players in the console industry, and API is one of the big ones in America. And so the equalizers on those consoles and their products sounded a certain way. So Waves has gone and tried to replicate the sound of those API modules digitally.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I was like,
oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I first saw API as the console maker. So now whenever I'm looking at software stuff and I see API, I always think of this first. It didn't occur to me that there's probably people where that's like they've never heard of API, the audio console maker, and they think of the programming thing first.
Yep, that would be me.
Yeah, so EQ on the snare drum, just cleaning up the mid-range. I think there's probably something really ringy in here. If I turn this up, you'll see what I was trying to get rid of. Almost like a balloony kind of sound that I wanted to get rid of. So just a bit of cleaning up in the mid-range there. Put it through a compressor. We turn that off. Yeah, so this API modeled compressor is really just adding some punch to the snare drum. And then, yeah, I was really digging API modeled stuff, I guess, because it seems to be on everything. What am I adding here? I'm just adding a lot of like 200 hertz, which is kind of where you feel that snare drum in the chest. If I turn this off. And here it is with that turned on. Just has a lot more impact. So that's the kick and the snare. Toms, I guess Tom 1 doesn't get used in this song. I didn't bother EQing it at all. Or maybe it just didn't need EQ. Let me see if I can find a section that has toms in it. Here we go. Yeah, I don't think I use the high tom in this song. That's probably why. But here's a couple tom hits. Probably just, yeah, scooping some mid-range out and adding some top end, kind of to give it a more pleasing overall sound. I'll take the EQ off. Just sounds punchier this way. Tighter, a bit more in your face. And then similar compression to what I was doing on the snare, just to give it some punch. So those are the toms. And then I also have all of the individual drums kind of being sent to the same bus for the room mics. Because in Steven Slate drums, you have all your drums with multiple mics on them, and you can route those mics different places. So what we just listened to now were all the mics that would have been directly on those drums in the samples. This is all of the room mics. This is the room mics for all of those drums. So it's not like you have your 3 inches away from the drum in this one. It's more what it would sound like in the room. Again, boosting level, because Steven Slate drums is rather quiet. EQ wise, just high passing to get rid of most of the low end, because I think the close mics really covered that low end. And then taking out a bit of harshness here. Let's see. Yeah, it was just a bit too abrasive, I think, in the mid-range here for what I wanted, so I just took some of that out. And then some compression, but finally something that's not API. Not doing a whole lot on that, just a little bit, like maybe 3 to 5 decibels of compression. It's more than what this meter shows. Just to kind of bring out the sustain of the drums more. It kind of squishes it down so you're not just hearing the initial hit of the drum, but you're also hearing it kind of resonate in the room. So those are all the sampled drums. I did use some of the natural drums too, though. I used the snare bottom for quite a bit of the snare sound. Really just, I wanted to use the snare bottom mic to get the brightness of the snare drum, so taking out most of the low end and just keeping the high frequency stuff and compressing it a lot.
So by the bottom mic you mean the under mic for the snare?
Yeah, exactly. It's a microphone
okay.
That's directly underneath the snare drum that's pointed upwards to kind of hear the wires of the snare drum. So you just have that kind of wiry, crunchy sound to work with. So yeah, I have the snare bottom mic, and this is no longer like samples from Steven Slate. This is from the actual recording sessions where I played drums. So that is me hitting that snare drum coming through that mic. There's a separate channel here for rim clicks, because I think there's one fill in the song that uses rim clicks.
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah.
So this is what this sounds like.
That's the DI one, right? Yeah.
In context. Yeah, I won't spend too much time diving into what I did there, because it's probably just the tom mic turned up. I didn't use any of the natural tom mics that we recorded. There's microphones on the hi-hats. I think this would have been a Rode M3, if I remember correctly. It would have been the same mic on the snare bottom, actually. I have 2 Rode M3s, and I usually use one on my hi-hats and one on the snare bottom. I only have one now. One broke, but at the time I had 2. No hi-hat there. Let me see if I can find... There we go. So just kind of adds a little bit of articulation to the hi-hat parts in sections like this. Brings out some of the detail in the performance. Looks like EQ-wise, I kind of took off all the low end. I took off a bit of the high end too, which is surprising, and just notched out a couple annoying ringy frequencies that were probably bothering me at the time. Also, similar token, I have a ride mic, which if you look here, my ride track, I just muted it for all the sections that didn't have ride symbols in it, and then similar kind of purpose as the hi-hat mic, just to bring more detail into the drum sound, taking all the low end out, notching a little bit of an annoying frequency. What else do we have? I have a mono room mic, which this would have been... I've got like a little tiled kitchenette at the end of my basement. I don't know if you remember this, Rogan.
Oh, yeah.
There's like a little tiled kitchenette, and I probably stuck a really cheap ribbon mic in there and closed the door. It's like this little blue Apex ribbon mic that I got for $60. It was like used and on clearance sale at Long McQuaid. But it actually sounds really nice.
That is shocking.
Right? For a little $60 mic, it actually gets a pretty big drum sound.
Well, that and that is in a tiled basement kitchenette with the door closed to the room to your drums. Like, the lengths that you went to get the sound that you got is just really impressive.
I just wanted I wanted some natural reverb, because no one listens to the drums with their ears up against the drums. So I wanted to put a mic as far away as I could, and as reverberant of a place. Well, I mean, if that's what you like, then probably don't hire me to mix.
What?
Mix
I can't hear you anymore. I've gone deaf from listening to the drums with my ear next to it.
You're just right under the snare.
Yeah, I did. You just sit underneath the snare drum and listen to drums that way.
It helps me sleep.
Is it because you can't hear anything anymore?
Maybe.
So looking. Didn't do a whole lot of EQ on this. I kind of just took out the low end and the high end because I wanted to capture more of the mid range. The close mics kind of handle that really hi-fi, high frequency stuff, and the kick drum mic has most of those subby low frequencies. So just rolling off the top and bottom, and a fair amount of compression with this guy, just to bring more of the sustain of the drums out. Kind of the same thing as what I was doing on the room mic from Steven Slate Drums. Lastly, I have a stereo pair of close room mics. These were each I think 6 feet away from the drum kit on either side of it, pretty close to the floor. And these were also really inexpensive ribbon mics. They were ART AR5s, which I think I got for $70 a piece at Long McQuaid used and on a clearance sale. You'll notice there's a pattern to where and when I buy things. So this is what these sound like. that's where the majority of the cymbals are coming from in the mix. Let's look at what I did. I turned them down by 10 decibels on the individual mics, the left and the right, and then turned them up 10 decibels on the bus. I don't know why I did that. And then EQ, it's pretty aggressive what I did. If I turn the EQ off, and I'll turn it on now. Kind of just took the low end out, and then I also took a lot of this mid-range at around 3 kilohertz out. If I add it back, there's kind of like these weird whistly frequencies that cymbals have in that area, so just got rid of those to clean up the sound and make it less abrasive. Use the same API compressor that I've already used on a couple of the other drums. Pretty light, it's not doing a whole lot. And then also using an exciter. This is the vintage oral exciter that Waves makes.
Oral exciter? I barely even know her.
Yeah, the name is actually pretty funny. It's like this old tube unit that was meant to make things sound brighter, basically. So this plugin they were made in like the 60s. This plugin tries to emulate one of these older units. If I take it off, yeah, so what that's doing is, if I go back to my EQ, I didn't take any high end out. They're just darker sounding mics, these ribbon mics, as ribbon mics usually are. So I wanted to add a bit of the really sparkly treble back into the sound. So did that with that exciter. And then I also have a reverb send. If I take it off. Yeah, so this reverb is really just adding a little bit more room and sustain to things. It's not a super long reverb and it's not super loud, but the drums were just sounding a little bit too dry through these mics before that reverb was there. So that's drums. Won't need to talk about drums, I think, for the rest of this, because it's pretty much the same sound.
Why don't we take it from the start of that section there and just take a go through?
Sure.
Maybe not right from there, but from the 4/4 section, or no, the 6/4. The 6/4.
I don't have the time signatures marked here, but I think I know what you mean.
Yeah. It's just
this one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So here you can hear that polyrhythm finally sort of like falls into place over a more cohesive time signature. Here it's 6/4, and you've got that 4/6, I believe. That da da ga da da ga da.
You got the snares kind of following a 4, and then the cymbals and the kick drums following a 6, I think, right?
Yeah, and then like musically, I have like a fairly straightforward, sort of repetitive tremolo, just slow pick guitar, like muted guitar over top in that high end, and that tends to be a theme for me as well. I like those muted high end like repetitive notes just to fill out sort of the harmonic space. Like that's a lot on my upcoming album as well that we're working on. A little bit later in there, I fool around with switching the how can I explain this? Like the numerator is the 4 and the denominator is the 6, and I swap those, so it takes this completely different feel just for one measure. Where this one you can really feel the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For one measure in there, you hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So you switch from 4/6 to 6/4 time?
So it's not the time signature, but it is what beat is within the measure on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
I
you start from
gotcha.
the beginning there.
If I go a few bars back from there. Yeah, that one
So
bar.
you can really hear
kind
how,
of invert the
how
polyrhythm.
yeah. So and that just adds a little character in there. It in an otherwise like pretty simplistic section as it's building. So yeah, that's all kind of musically what's happening. The bottom voice is in that rhythm guitar, and it's like it gives more space to that, and it follows one aspect of the polyrhythm while the bass follows like both aspects of the polyrhythm, so that there's that cohesive unit again. Like I try and keep that so that it sort of flows all together. But if you were to take like the rhythm guitar separately from the from like what another section is doing, you would be like, oh, how does that fit together with this? But when you bring it all together, it creates this sort of landscape that is like understandable, more cohesive.
Yeah, it definitely works well as a unit.
From there, that section might be good to take a look at those rhythm guitars as well.
Yeah. There's actually 2 sets of rhythm guitars in this song, which is not something I see very often, I know. So this is the second set.
Going for those 30 tracks.
Yeah, we had to increase the track count somehow. So in this section, this is what I have labeled as rhythm 2. Let's take a look at just what those sound like. So definitely like a very bright, in-your-face kind of guitar sound. This would be the Ibanez, again, Rogan, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you just sent me the DI, so let me take off all the stuff, all the processing. This is what I would have received from you. Just like a solid DI sound tracked through your Focusrite.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of the amp sound that I dialed in. So I look at the amp sound. We've got this Kazrog vintage driver, which is supposed to be like an Ibanez tube screamer. I'm kind of doing the thing that everyone does with the tube screamer, where they turn the gain down and the output all the way up to drive the amp harder. The amp sim that we're using is a Kazrog Psycho C, which is like a EVH 5150 type of head.
That crunchy sound.
Yeah, very crunchy and like present. We're using the red lead channel. I've got the mids turned all the way up. And we'll see this when we look at the part where there's the 2 rhythm guitars playing. This was to give some differentiation between the 2 rhythm guitars. This one has the mids all the way up. I think if we look at the other one, the mids are all the way down. So you kind of have one of them occupying the mid-range more and the other one being more scooped sounding. And then cabinet-wise, I'm using an impulse response from Ownhammer. It's of a Mesa straight 4x12 cab with V60s in it, and it's a Sennheiser 421 microphone. That's kind of the amp sound. Let's look at the processing I did on the rhythm guitar bus here. So EQ'd it about... Yeah, I just took some low end out and notched out a couple annoying little frequencies in the high mids. So I used a limiter here, Waves L1, just ready to lock the dynamics of these guitars in place. I find like rhythm guitars, you really want them to fit into the mix, but you don't necessarily want them popping out at you. And so by having them be a really consistent volume, they kind of just stay in the same place in the mix all the time. So that's why I use a limiter, is because I set a threshold and it's never going to go above that threshold. And then my favorite AQ at the time, I guess, this API 550B. Let's see, what are we doing here? Let's turn this on. Yeah, just making it even more aggressive sounding, adding some low end thump in at 200 hertz, cutting a little bit of the mids at 1K, probably because I had them turned all the way up on the amp. And then a really big boost here at 3K is like where the bite of that guitar lives, and a little bit at 10K as well. So making it brighter, more in your face. So that's the Rhythm 2 sound. It definitely stands out a lot in sections like that. It's like a very percussive element that you can't miss. What do you want to look at next, Rogan? Do you want to look at,
I think,
leads maybe?
Yeah, we can take a look at this. Is probably the best section, for leads again too. And then maybe after bass would probably be best in that breakdown section.
Yeah, okay. Let's look at the leads here. So there's our lead sound. Let's see what was going on here. Okay, so here, same thing, you would have just sent me DIs. I'll take all my stuff off. Nice clean performance. Let's look at the amp sound.
A lot of editing.
A lot of editing. You're supposed to keep that secret, man. You didn't see me telling you guys about all the editing I did to the drums. You're just supposed to take the compliment. All right, so it looks like pretty similar vintage driver setting, Kazarog vintage driver. I have the gain turned up a bit higher than I did on the rhythms. And then the amp is the same amp, Psycho C. I've got the gain turned up fairly high, bass rolled off, treble rolled off. Really wanted to push the mid-range here, because you have like the drums and the bass and the rhythm guitar that have a more scooped sound to them. And so this is where I could really push the mid-range so that it comes to the fronts of the mix melodically. I'm using the blue crunch channel as well, so not the red lead channel. It's interesting, I use the higher gain channel on the rhythms and a lower gain channel here for the leads. And then the cabinet sound...
Would you usually do that the other way around? Yeah, usually
the other way around. Usually you want more distortion on the things that you want to stick out more.
It probably works on that more because that is more of a fluid line than where you want the crunch and the rhythm there.
Yeah, in this case I really wanted the rhythms to be kind of fizzy and bright, and I wanted the leads to kind of sit more in the mid-range and be a bit more mellow sounding, but also more melodic as opposed to percussive. So that's why I think that lower gain kind of tone worked. And as far as the amp microphone, like the cabinet microphone, I think this is a Marshall MR82 M75B, some sort of Marshall cab, and it's Bold 06, so it's some sort of mic blend that Owenhammer put together. I don't actually know the particular microphones that would have been used in that. Looking at the bus, I've got an 8th note delay, same delay setting we looked at earlier on with the harmonic lead guitar, and little plate for some reverb. So when I like play a little bit and you can hear that decay. So it just gives some space to them because they kind of sound dry without it compared to when I turn it on. We've got a bit more room around them that way. And then let's look at these. So some EQ. Cleaning up some of like the boxiness in the mid-range around 500 and getting rid of some of the annoying high mid-range frequencies that I usually have to on a guitar track, and then rolling off some of the low and the high end to just give it more of that mid-range spot in the mix like I was mentioning. And then I'm also using a limiter here, same L1 limiter, just to kind of cement its like dynamics. Every note I wanted to stick out equally so that it's kind of consistent in the mix. So that's what that limiter is doing. And then, oh, interesting, what is this doing? I don't remember doing this. Oh, interesting. So I don't know if you can kind of hear that when I turn this off. It sounds like you played the first note in every group of 6 the hardest. And as a result, those notes had more like low mids to them. Kind of this 160 hertz area. And so I put a compressor just on that area to even that out, so it wasn't as noticeable that the first note was louder. And then, of course, no guitar tone is complete without me throwing this API EQ on it. This is just pretty simple. I'm boosting 800 hertz to kind of bring out the mid-range. I'll turn it off. Turn it on.
Do we need to get you some different EQs for Christmas, Deyson?
I mean, I've since diversified which EQs I use, but 2 years ago I was all about API, I guess. Yeah, API, if you want to send me a console, I'm sure I'll use it all over everything. So I think that's... Oh, bass would be the next one, right? Let's look at some bass.
Yeah. Probably in that breakdown section.
This one?
No, the like where there's the slap section. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the bass here. So let's just listen to the
so
bass
here I'm bringing out my slap chops.
Okay, sweet. Let's see what's going on
So
there.
This is another great example of me loving to hold the beat over on a 7/4 measure.
Yeah, the bass
It's always on
notes is along
7/4 for some reason. Like that octo sun is 7/4 when it does that in that beginning section, and this is 7/4 with the beat held over.
There's a lot
in
of
that
7
beginning
on this
section.
record. Lots of 7/4 for sure. So you double track the bass, which is also kind of one of those interesting things that I don't see that often. Do you want to like talk a bit about why you double tracked bass?
So, like I definitely like. Well, I believe that there's an interview that or a sort of like bio flick or something that Rush did where Geddy Lee has talked about all like they did a lot of double tracking of the bass, but even like recording 2 bass parts at the same time, like one as more of a melody and one as more of a rhythm. So, and that seemed to like really beef up and create that like really unique sort of Geddy Lee tone with that and the Fender signature Jazzmaster that he uses. But yeah, I wanted very much that sort of beefy bass tone all throughout here, especially with like my playing style being more rhythmic and in my writing as well. I wanted to bring that out and have sort of more in that that bass end, that rhythm section.
Yeah, and I always knew you as a bass player before anything else, so it made sense that there was more bass on this than I'd be used to seeing. So yeah, let's see what I did here. Let's go, here we go. There's the purple. So what I did is, you gave me 2 bass performances, and I took one of those and used it for the low end of the bass, because I didn't really want the low end to sound kind of smeary the way that you get with double tracked stuff. I want it to be like really solid, straight down the center. I didn't want bass panned out to the sides because really our ears are not very good at localizing low frequency sounds. And so it makes sense to have a lot of those low frequency sounds in mono, because if you're listening on headphones, for example, like if you have a subwoofer in your room and it's placed to the right side of you, you're not necessarily going to hear more bass just in your right ear, because our ears don't really pick up the direction of low frequency sound like that. But if someone was listening on headphones and you heard a lot of bass in the right ear, it's really jarring. So I was trying to avoid that. So let's just solo the low part of the bass. Yeah, so just kind of rolling off all the high end down to 500, even taking out some of the low end up to like 67 hertz, because the kick drum kind of, I placed the kick drum in those really low frequencies, like 70 hertz and below, and I didn't want the bass and the kick drum to be clashing with each other. I want them to have kind of their own space. So EQ there, and then just just a really clean sounding compressor to really even out the dynamics and give a really consistent low end. And then for the stereo bass, I have these two bass left, bass right tracks. And that's really where you get like that stereo feel to the bass, and where all the high end and kind of growl lives. So same chain on both the left and the right channel. I'm high passing to 250 hertz, kind of taking all the low end out. Also running this through a limiter. You can see that's actually not doing that much. I think I put that there just to raise the level a lot. It'd probably be cool. It looks like I'm boosting the level, and maybe some of the highest peaks from your slaps and stuff. There might have been occasional slaps that like you hit the pickup and it got really loud, and so it would catch those. And then same with the clean bass, I'm also using this Dark Glass Ultra plugin, but with the distortion turned on. Similar EQ settings, boosting the bass, cutting some low mids, boosting some high mids. Drive is not set all the way up, but mostly up, and 100% blend. So we're getting I'm not like blending in the clean signal with the distorted signal. It's just the distorted signal. And then cabinet settings. These are just the stock cabinet settings in the plugin. I probably use something similar to this, but unfortunately those settings seem to have gotten lost with the different versions of this plugin. And then EQ. Let's see, what is this doing? Yeah, there was still too much low end after I ran it through the Dark Glass plugin. I wanted to, it's another high pass at 250 to get rid of that low end again, that this plugin reintroduced. And then cutting a little bit of mid-range too. It was just feeling a bit honky sounding. So that gives you this overall bass sound, which then I EQ'd a bit more, boosted some of these low mids where I really wanted the bass to live, and cut some of these mid-range frequencies where I think it was probably just clashing with the guitar a little bit. Yeah, this is the before the EQ, and that's afterwards. Just kind of cleaned up some harshness and probably gave it its own space separate from the guitars. And then a final limiter just to control some of the louder hits at the very end. So yeah, that is the bass tone pretty much across the EP for the most part. What should we hop onto next?
All right, I think all of that is pretty similar. I don't do much else until the very end with that reverby part.
Oh, one thing we haven't looked at is the muted guitars.
Oh, yes.
Can't forget these guys. So let's see, what do we have going on for these muted guitars? Here we are. And they're not going to any sort of bus as far as I can tell. They're just right to the main. Let's look at what so I didn't put an amp on these, or did they go through my Mesa? They must have gone through my Mesa, right?
I think they went through the Mesa, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like the clean channel on the Mesa. No idea what mics I used. I didn't put that in the name of the track, unfortunately. Sounds like it might be an SM57 or something like that. And then just EQing, kind of taking out some of the high mids if I take this off. And then I turn it back on. Okay, sorry, there we go. Now it's turned off on both sides. Because I didn't really feel like these were the star of the show in this part. They were more there to add texture.
Yeah.
And so I was taking out kind of the higher mid-range frequencies that our ears are kind of tuned to, saving that more for other elements. And then just the limiter to control the dynamics a little bit. It's not doing a whole lot of work. And then also sent them to a quarter note delay and some little plate for reverb. Yeah, just to kind of give some space to them. There's a lot of reverb on those, and that kind of gives them the illusion of being further away, which sort of works because they're a textural element that doesn't really need to be right up in your face. So yeah, that's those guys. We also did not talk about like this enormous stack of lead guitars.
Oh, yes. I think I have doubles there and octaves.
Let's see. So we got this first pair here.
Yeah, so that's the low octave.
And then what's this next pair? So you quad tracked that part, eh?
Oh, I might have. Oh, I think that was because I wanted that to really like stick out and be beefy.
Yeah, that's quad tracked. And then there's also this last pair, which is an octave.
Yeah.
But all of these leads I think are being processed rather similarly as the leads we looked at before, because they're on the same channels going to the same bus. I basically just had all of them going into one bus together. Yeah. That multi-band compression makes more sense now, because you can kind of hear when I turn it off. You hear the pick attack in the low end really prominently.
Mm-hmm.
And there just wasn't room in the low end to have the leads taking up that space. So yeah, that's probably where that C6 came from, that multi-band compressor.
All right.
Sweet. And we already talked about the synth, that pad.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same throughout. I didn't get too crazy on this song.
Synth 2. We haven't talked about Synth 2.
Ah, yes, this.
In this section. Oh, I'm muting. I'm soloing this as well. Okay, here we go. So also.
Yeah, so it just kind of follows the rhythm. The rhythm guitar there, what chords it's playing, and I think it only really plays the two notes.
Yeah, it only does those two notes. Native Instruments massive as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
That would be everything. I don't think I did any I didn't do any like organs or anything, so I think it
Right.
would all be sort of massive, like modern synth stuff.
Gotcha. I mean, mix-wise, I just kind of took out some of the low end and boosted a little bit of 763. I guess that's where it kind of had a bit of an ability to poke out amongst all the other guitars and stuff that were happening. It's kind of got a cool... It's got a cool stereo quality to it. It kind of moves between the left and the right side as it plays. I like that synth. You don't necessarily notice it.
Yeah, it just adds a little texture to the bottom.
Yeah, it's one of those things you notice if I mute it, but you don't necessarily notice that it's there if you're listening to this and you haven't seen that before.
Yeah, once you played it, I heard it, but before that, I didn't know it was there.
Yeah, it's like one of those ear candy things that you don't really notice that it's there, but it still contributes something.
Or
It's
when
like
somebody tells you...
Deyson and I were watching the Caligula. Deyson and I were watching the Caligula's Horse like mix breakdown videos, and they have like this hype synth that's in the Tempest,
Oh, the
and it's like hidden way in the background. Yeah. Yes. And it's like just in the background, and ever since they played that, I can like pick it out in the album mix, but before that, I had no idea.
Apparently, Jens was mixing that a lot louder than they wanted at first. And they're like, no, you can't turn that up that high because it just sounds like a Eurodance song now. Yeah, there's a lot of cool little things like that. Tiny little parts that only happen once that I never would have picked out on my own, but they definitely, like, I noticed them now listening back to that album again. Lots of layers in that album.
That's cool. It's like when somebody tells you that wine has a note of dark cherry or black cherry, and you're like, oh, I definitely didn't taste that before, but I can taste it now. Or maybe that's just me, but...
Music and wine are apparently more similar than I picked them.
And they really are. You could make a podcast.
Music and wine? I feel like that's got to be a podcast already.
It's gotta be.
For sure.
It's probably even something like a prog podcast. It's like, that sounds like some sort of niche thing some proggers would come up with.
Yeah, I mean, we're proggers and we just came up with it, so. Yeah, it is. Oh my god, there's a prog rock and vino, a pairing of music and wine.
Love it.
Just a second, I'm gonna go find that.
Bookmark it.
I'm gonna go find that real quick. You can probably get to those that ending section with the reverbs.
There's one more thing here. Rhythm 1. Rhythm 1 we have not touched upon, and kind of how Rhythm 1 and Rhythm 2 work together. Because in this section, the real chuggy section,
Oh yes, yeah.
you got these. I forgot that these guys are here.
Yeah, got that low B in there, just as a little color.
So yeah, we've got Rhythm 2, which we already looked at, and then we also have this Rhythm 1.
Yes, so that's a good example of that, like layering like textures. Is I took the same thing, but I put like an extra little bit of rhythm over it with those like triplet chugs, like the da 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 da
Yeah,
da 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 da.
the 2 16th notes and the 8th note.
That creates sort of a I don't know, again, that cohesiveness where, like, before you had that very jarring sort of, like, 7/4, like, held over the beat feel, where that adds just that little bit of like, straightness across the bottom.
It's a real
end
headbanging riff. It's like, you just want to bob your head to that. Mix-wise, yeah, if we look at the amp. Okay, so I lied. I didn't have the mids turned all the way down. But yeah, for this one, mids are kind of right in the middle, and if on Rhythm 2, if you remember, I had them cranked all the way up.
Yeah.
So that's where there's some differentiation in the sound. That's more of a scooped sound. That's more of a mid-rangey kind of, like almost old school rock sound.
Yeah.
Just gives enough separation between the two, so it's still a wall of sound, but you can kind of tell that there's two different things going on there. So should we jump to the end?
Yeah.
What have we didn't look at
Nice.
this guy.
Yes.
Literally just the DI with a high pass
It's
on
just straight DI.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that funky little bit. I think it only has the synth too, and maybe the hi-hat keeping the beat.
Yeah, there's the hi-hat, and then the pad. Nice little...
It's probably the simplest part of the entire album.
Yeah, the least going on. Alright. So let's jump to the end then, to when the arrangement really changes from what it was. Here we go. Yeah, it starts off there. You have like the pad in the background and that really airy, kind of clean guitar. Did you must have done like a volume swell with your your volume knob or something. So let's see what's going on here. If this is like the amp sound. It's a little boring actually when you take all the effects off. The amp sound is a thermonic black verb, so like Fender twin reverb kind of sound. Fairly scooped, looks like. Push the bass and the treble and cut the mids back. What is this? Oh, I'm not using that, so never mind. I was probably trying out a different amp. This is a 1x12 Fender Deluxe Reverb cabinet with a 421 on it. And it's an own hammer impulse as well, I think. I probably used own hammer across all of the guitar tones. So that's the amp sound. There's a limiter there as well. Some of those higher plucks I found were just like, they had too much attack. And so L1 does a good job of kind of clamping down on that, and like when they go past the threshold, it really smooths out the pokey kind of attack that had. EQ wise, boosting a bit of this low end here just gives it a bit more body, and then it got like an upside down Batman here going on, just EQing out some harshness in the upper mids. Yeah, just kind of taking out some of that really pokey upper mids that sounds good on the distorted guitar, but we wanted a very mellow sound here, so ducking those down a bit, and then little plate with an 8-second reverb time. Yeah, that decay lasts a really long time, but it does a good job of kind of making it sound really wet and airy.
Yeah, and that brings us into like we have that guitar there that does pretty much the exact same chord sequence, but it sort of canonizes it in a different rhythmic function.
Yeah, it's almost like a delay of the guitar, but it's not exactly a delay of the guitar.
Yeah, and we wanted we did a lot more of a dry tone on that.
Yeah, that one sticks out more.
Yeah.
I always use those terms to refer to like space, like the illusion of space. So whether something sounds like it's in a big room where everything reverberates a lot, or you can also achieve it with delay. Kind of Yeah, and like a dry sound is something that's really close to your ears. There isn't a lot of effects on it. It sounds just very close and hi-fi, if that makes sense. I know we use all these silly adjectives for some of this stuff. So with that being said, let's look at the more dry sounding kind of guitar that echoes what the other one was doing. That's the wrong channel. Here we go, these two. So probably similar amp setting. Yeah, Thermonic Black Verb, so like Fender Twin Reverb. Same cabinet sound, that deluxe reverb. I've got the limiter on here as well, because it was probably sounding pokey. It's not doing a whole lot though. Oh, okay, that's why. Certain notes were really loud, and so it kind of brought those back in, controls them, and then the same EQ setting. The main difference here is that there is much less reverb on it. It looks like I'm using the little plate send from earlier on that has a much shorter reverb time, and I've got like less of it blended in. And I think that functions in a really cool way when everything else comes in, like when the drums come in and stuff. Because you don't really need these guitars, the more wet sounding guitars, to be quite as pokey, because they follow the drums and the other instruments. But then the second guitar, the one that kind of echoes it, is kind of pushed forward in the mix so that you notice it more. It kind of needs to be drier and more articulate for you to pick up on the rhythm.
Yeah, and I think with it being a part that is like so far off of the beat one through most of it as well, like that makes it sort of stick out in a cool way as well, and draws more attention towards sort of the little complexities that part offers.
Yeah, definitely. Last thing to look at, I guess, is the fade out here. So not really anything too interesting going on there. I'm just kind of automating down the volume of everything except those guitars and the synth pad. And then
the synth pad goes on and on. Just add a little layer of color underneath
and then we're back to
transition.
Orchestral stuff. And there's some automation of the synth pad there to kind of transition it from the volume that it was for the majority of the song to the volume where I wanted it to be when the orchestral stuff came in. It kind of fades out to the background without it being too noticeable, so that the orchestral stuff can come in and kind of take the spotlight. This is all, this was all mixed the same way pretty much as the intro. I didn't change anything, it looks like. Might have changed some panning. I did change some panning because we can't turn automation on. Panning because there is fewer instruments here, so to kind of maintain that balanced, having the left and the right be the same volume, I had to change some of the panning so that they filled out the stereo spectrum evenly. Other than that, it's the same thing. And that's everything in the song, eh?
Yeah. There's that tiny little bit of sawtooth that returns just as it's
yes,
automated
this guy.
volume up in. Why don't we... Yeah, just adds that little extra bit into Tailwind. So why don't we close out with that section for tonight, and then we can come back to Tailwind and Octosun